Hello there, Larry Kotlikoff. This is Glenn Loury at the Glenn Show, and I'm very happy to be welcoming economics guru and finance and macroeconomics student extraordinaire, Laurence Kotlikoff, professor at Boston University. Hey, Larry.
My main claim to fame, Glenn, is being a buddy of yours, so that's good enough.
Thanks very much. I think that should get you over the line anyway.
Yeah.
And so we're here to talk about who should be the next chair of the Federal Reserve Board. Let me just introduce it, Larry. So everybody has read all these pieces in the newspaper. They're a couple of weeks old now, but the decision has not yet been made by the president. These pieces, which are describing a contest or conflict between two top contenders for the job, Janet Yellen and Larry Summers.
Right.
Yellen, who is, well, why don't you describe who Janet Yellen is, Larry? I think you might do a better job than me.
Well, I've known Janet, and I've also known Larry since both from graduate school. Janet was a young assistant professor and teaching us international trade. She was probably the best teacher I had at Harvard. She's fantastic.
And you and Larry were in the same, excuse me, Larry, you and Larry Summers were in the same class at Harvard?
He was about 2 years,
Janet Yellen?
2 years below. Larry was a little bit, he was a little bit younger. So he showed up a little bit later. But so Janet has had a terrific academic career, wrote some very high quality papers, became head of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, ran the Bank of San Francisco, Federal Reserve of San Francisco for many years. She's now been vice chairman of the Fed for a couple of years, which is the second highest position in the Fed, pretty much running the
number two at the Fed. All right.
Number two. And she was also chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under Clinton. So she's had a great career in government service, and she's a first-rate, extremely bright economist. She's very thoughtful. I've spent a lot of time talking to her, one-on-one, and it's always a very deep conversation. She doesn't pretend she knows all the answers. She's trying to find the answers. She's trying to press her own knowledge. She's a very different personality than Summers. She's somebody who can work with people, who can manage a big operation, and who's also not in the pay of any bank. She's an independent person.
Hold on, Larry. Larry, hold on. We have gone from a description of Janet Yellen to an advocacy for her for the job, and I just want to, proceed in a systematic way. I want also to recall that I met Janet Yellen in Oxford in about 1977 when I was a very, very young economist, and was visiting All Souls College, where Joe Stiglitz was the Drummond Professor of Economics at All Souls, and where George Akerlof, who is the Nobel Prize-winning economist and the husband of Janet Yellen, and Janet were dinner guests at the same great dinner party, accessing the wine cellar of All Souls, which is estimable, I might say.
Sure.
So anyway, I wanted to get that in. But okay, so Janet Yellen, deep experience in the executive branch, in the Fed, an academic career of great distinction, and definitely qualified for the job. So who is Laurence Summers? Well, we know who Laurence Summers is. Laurence Summers is estimable professor of economics at Harvard. He's also former Secretary of Treasury. He's also former chief economic counsel to President Obama. And he's also a protege of Robert Rubin and a guy who's made a lot of money on Wall Street and is very close to a lot of bankers. Yeah. So what do you want to say about Laurence Summers?
And he also was chief economist of the World Bank, so he's had a lot of government experience too.
Indeed, that should be mentioned. Thank you. Yeah.
He certainly has had a lot of experience. But now we have to ask about who's going to be the best Fed chairman. What is needed for that job, and who's got really a track record of performance as opposed to failure. Summers has got
former president of Harvard University. Wait a minute.
That's right.
We forgot a very important dimension of my man's portfolio.
I was about to add that back into the list. former president of Harvard.
As
So he's had quite a lot of jobs. Now the question is, has he done a good job in those jobs? And I think the answer is no. I think the answer is pretty clearly no. You don't see any record of great performance in any of these positions. If you think about his days in the World Bank, the biggest thing that came out of that was this kind of scandal where he probably just, stupidly, not really probably meaning it fully, suggested that the rich countries should dump their garbage in the poor countries, and that would be the most efficient.
Larry, please, Larry, come on, that's a canard, man. That's a canard. You and I both know from price theory that the people who are going to, at the margin, give up the least of what they really want in order to deal with the trash are the ones who are going to, in the efficient allocation, be taking most of the trash, and transfers will take place that will be partially compensatory. To observe that may not be politic, but it's hardly disqualifying to be chairman of the Fed. Okay, well, that's my opinion.
That's the thing that came across.
I just think it's a canard. I know this quote scandal that you're talking about. I think it's a phony scandal.
Well, I'm not saying it was a real scandal. I'm just saying that this is what was marked by his time there. It wasn't a great, thrilling new idea about how to end poverty. It wasn't like Jeff Sachs going on a real campaign to try and get rich people, people from Hollywood, people from all over the world who get them energized to put money into impoverished villages in Africa. It wasn't any new model of development, a new approach to development. There wasn't anything that came out except this silly incident. And I agree, there's some economic basis for where the garbage ends up being put. But that's the thing. I don't, he spends time at the World Bank. What do we point to as a great track record at the World Bank? Do we know of anything? Can we point to anything that came out of his time at the World Bank that wasn't different from anybody else? The answer is no.
Well, okay, Larry, let me stipulate the point. You're saying that he has a record of failure. Item number one is his tenure at the World Bank. It was not successful. I'm not going to try to contradict that. I have no evidence to the contrary. Okay. Go on. What's item number two?
Well, item number two is as chief advisor to the Clinton administration, economic advisor, he, we have no Social Security reform. The healthcare reform did not occur. We had no healthcare reform. We had no reform so Medicare wasn't fixed, Medicare wasn't fixed, Social Security wasn't fixed, the tax system wasn't fixed. So the only...
Larry, I'm sorry, excuse me, Larry. I remember the 1990s as a boom time. I remember equity values going up and up and up. I remember real estate values going up and up and up. And I remember a lot of people being happy. It was good times all over again. That was when he was the Secretary of the Treasury.
Glenn, he was the undersecretary. He was Secretary of Treasury for about 6 months at the very end of Clinton's administration. So
okay, well, that's when he was a part of the policy making with Robert Rubin team that was advising Bill Clinton during one of the great periods of economic growth and prosperity.
Okay, so let's understand why that occurred. The baby boomers, 78 million of them were coming into their peak earning years, so you would naturally expect the economy to expand dramatically during this period just because of their increased productivity, because of the nature of the age productivity profile, and because of their magnitude.
Interesting point.
And so, the economy did well. We had a dot-com bubble. Now, was Summers responsible for inventing Amazon.com or Pets.com? No. I mean, a lot of stuff happens that...
Okay. Let me ask you this. I got it. What about the financial crises? What about the Latin American and Southeast Asian runs on currencies and all that kind of stuff? Well, that's your territory. Did he manage well or poorly as
I think he came,
Secretary of Treasury?
My sense is that the Asian crisis he handled not as well as possible. That he got there a little too late in trying to deal with it. Certainly didn't cut it off at the pass before it happened. These things happened under his watch. So, that's
Okay.
And also, we can't blame the Asian, what Thai banks do on Larry Summers. So it's not fair to say that either. What I'm concerned about is that he didn't provide any leadership in fixing our core problems, our domestic policy problems, whether it be, taxes, Social Security, healthcare, education. I mean, or actually talk to the public about what these problems are and how to fix them, and why we need government involvement in the healthcare sector.
Okay.
There's been no conversation with the public that's really conveyed solid economics. He's not a great economics teacher, communicator, which is something I think we need to have.
Let me interrupt for a minute.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, the position we're talking about is chairman of the Fed, and I wonder whether or not those are the qualities, economics teacher that is, that are most significant. And maybe central bank governor who can most calm the waters in the markets and most inspire the confidence of investors, or who can most acutely discern what the right tone for monetary policy should be and set a leadership direction.
Well, this guy's tone is not, Larry's not got a particularly easy tone when it comes to talking with other people that he's worked with. He's made many real enemies out of very nice people. And then you go look at what happened with Harvard. There was just one. I've talked to many people at Harvard.
I don't want to get into that, Larry.
Okay.
Excuse me, Larry.
Yep.
Larry Kotlikoff. I prefer not to go down that path, if you don't mind. I mean, I think it would just be a waste of our time. I agree with you that he didn't succeed as president of Harvard. I'm not sure it's relevant to.
Well, look, Glenn, it's a huge organization that he's running, and he gets fired. I mean, that's a pretty good test of leadership or failure of leadership. I mean, and that enormous organization that he can't succeed at. Because of his human skills or lack of them. So,
again, I'm just wondering whether or not making comfortable the elite faculty of a world-dominant Ivy League institution is the skill that's required of the guy who's going to be, or the woman, in charge of the board that governs the central bank of the country.
Well, the board consists of people that are I think there may be something like 17 members.
Why don't we talk about economics? Excuse me. Instead of talking about politics, instead of talking about academic politics in particular, and there are many arguable cases there. I mean, we could spend many hours debating Larry Summers' stewardship of Harvard University. Why don't we talk about the economics? Because it seems to me that that's what really matters. That's what really matters. So hold on. Wall Street, Robert Rubin, Citibank, men and women in the room cutting deals about billions and ultimately trillions of dollars, and allocating pain and deciding who's going to take what kind of haircut and when. Okay, the power machinations of high finance. All right, now Summers has been in all of those rooms. I'm not saying Yellen hasn't been. I'm not now making a case for Summers or against. I'm just saying, one of the things that people object to is how close Larry is to Wall Street.
Yeah, that's a problem. Okay? That's to me is a big problem.
And if you take Larry Summers as one pole and Elizabeth Warren as the other pole, you might have a reasonably good sketch of the spectrum of bank-friendly attitude and opinion amongst high-level economic policy participants. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying all this to try to lay the ground for you to make the case, I assume, against Laurence Summers based upon his connection to Wall Street, because I want to push back against that. I think a connection to Wall Street might be a good thing in the man or the woman who is going to be the governor, the chairman of the board of governors of the Federal Reserve. So let's talk Wall Street.
Well, this is you see corrupt practices on the Wall Street occurring every day. We just had two people from J.P. Morgan, who was supposed to be a pretty clean bank, just indicted under criminal charges for that whale thing. I mean, this is every day, every single day. There's some company pleading, in effect, guilty for some financial malfeasance. And the Fed is the regulator. It's supposed to be an independent body. It's not supposed to be in the pay of the people they're regulating. Now, it just strikes me as completely a huge conflict of interest to hire somebody to run the Fed who has just come from, who immediately runs from the White House to take huge salaries from Wall Street, and then you're going to put him back in charge of Wall Street in the role of chairman of the Fed. Well, I mean, who's going to be regulating whom? I think that Wall Street will be regulating Summers, not the other way around. I don't think Yellen has ever taken that kind of money from any Wall Street bank. She's had plenty of experience interacting with these kinds of issues of how to regulate these banks. And I think she actually has a much better handle on what's wrong with the banking system and understands that Dodd-Frank is not everything it's cut out to be in terms of it's not exactly what she, I think, would have put into place in terms of regulatory reform had she had her druthers. But
Well,
Summers
okay,
was there.
hold on.
Summers was there in charge of. He was the chief economist when Dodd-Frank gets passed. He was the chief economist when Obama.
Larry, I want to slow you down a minute. Okay, let's come back to Dodd-Frank. Let's come back to that. I want to talk about Wall Street salaries and conflict of interest. So here would be the pushback. Okay, high level, specialized, rarefied, complex transactions, legal, business, financial,
right,
whatever. They happen. Okay, companies merge. They need people to represent them. Acquisitions occur. They need investment bankers to acquire the funds. Companies engage in substantial foreign direct investment. They need strategic advice about how to position themselves, how to hedge their risk, and so forth and so on. These dealings are going on all over the globe at a very high level every minute of the day. Now, if I'm a partner in a law firm somewhere, if I'm the Deputy Secretary of Treasury in a high government post in a large country, if I've been in charge of the public finances of the government because I've been director of the Office of Management and Budget or something like that, I have a lot of specialized skills that are extremely valuable to corporations and wealthy individuals who are doing deals all over this planet. There's nothing new in that. That's been going on since time immemorial.
But Glenn, think about where that...
Can I just finish my point? Let me finish my point. If people participate in those transactions and they get compensated, they're going to be compensated handsomely. They can be Democrats or Republicans. They can be economists or they can be lawyers. How many significant left political figures have had substantial involvement in participation in the legal/financial world of private dealings, whether they be Al Gore or, for that matter, William Jefferson Clinton or Felix Rohatyn or, whatever. Okay? So the fact that Larry Summers made money on Wall Street is very natural. It's not a surprise to anybody, and I don't see why it's disqualifying.
Well, Glenn, he's not being paid.
He had the skills.
Glenn,
he's not being compensated for the unique skills. And
no, his unique skills, led him to lose tons of money for Harvard and his clients when he was working before he came to the White House under Obama. He's not exactly a financial guru, but he's got his connections. So he's being paid for his connections. That's why he's being paid. Before he went to the Obama administration, he was being paid, I think, $5 million a year for his contacts, his connections. This is trading. This is not based on you don't get paid $5 million a year for just because you're there's plenty of people on Wall Street who are just as good in evaluating projects, and it's for.
$5 million
maybe that some of that's
Larry.
legitimate. Maybe he knows certain people in certain countries that he can help them to grease the wheels. But that's what's going on here. It's not. It's not his terrific acumen in finance. Trust me,
Larry. I don't trust you. Sounds like sour grapes to me. I mean, I don't believe it. I don't believe that Larry Summers is an empty suit who is just doing a lot of middleman connection trading. I don't believe that for a minute. This is a guy who's got It's funny. I laugh because I'm not expecting myself to be taking this position, but I just can't bear this categorical denigration that you're engaged in here on Larry Summers. I mean, this is a guy who has written a number of very significant academic articles that have had a big impact on his field when he was a relatively young man, who has risen to be Secretary of Treasury, who's been involved in global finance for a quarter of a century, who's as smart as anybody, and no one denies that this guy is not smart, knows a great deal. You're telling me that amongst all the people who are getting $5 million, a piddly $5 million a year, you and I both know that people who do these deals, $5 million a year is not a lot of money. So of all the people who are getting this $5 million a year, this is the guy who's trading favors and not bringing ideas to the table? That is deeply implausible, Laurence Kotlikoff. I think Larry Summers is full of ideas, bringing them to any table that he's participating in. Now, you may not like his ideas, okay? You may think that his advocacy of deregulation of financial transactions and all of this kind of stuff that led to this leverage stuff that created the crisis was a deep mistake. Or you may think that he and Robert Rubin and their ilk have the wrong values and would put different weights on the policy outcomes than you would want to put. Or you may think that he's a political craven, that he's just an ambitious careerist, and he's not standing up for the truth that he and you and I both know as economists, but that he's not willing to act on. But to say that he's an empty suit, I'm not buying it.
I'm not saying he's a completely empty suit. I haven't said that. I'm saying that mostly what he's getting paid for is his connections, not for his acumen. We've got lots and lots of brilliant people in this country who have plenty of ideas in the financial area, published routinely in top journals. I mean, he doesn't have publications in the top finance journals. There's not a single one of his, if you look at the top 200 cited economics articles, there's not a single article by Summers in the top 200. So, the reporters are very impressed by his intelligence. They'd be very impressed by your intelligence, Glenn. I think anybody who listened to you and listened to Larry would say you're probably smarter than Larry in many ways. You certainly know a lot more about a lot more things. But you're not being paid $5 million
Flattery
a year.
will get you nowhere.
I mean, you're not being offered a $5 million a year job in Wall Street, and I'm sure you could come up with your value added in terms of evaluating deals, and might be just good. But you can't pick up the telephone necessarily and call the president and say, do this thing for Citi. Okay, that's the difference, Glenn. And let's be honest about why you're not being called down to Washington to Wall Street to work at $5 million a year, and he is. It's because he can pick up the phone and and use his influence to get things to happen for his patrons, and that is a problem when you're talking about him being the head of the Fed. That seems to me to be an ethical problem, and it's a problem for Obama. Why Obama would choose this guy? Maybe Obama's looking for his own payday after he leaves the White House. Maybe that's what's going on, but I think it's a very serious...
Oh, stop it, Larry.
What?
Stop it. Obama's already been paid. I don't know. What do you mean looking for his payday? Obama can generate funds over the course of his post-presidency in so many ways. He hardly needs to curry favor. I don't know why he's.
In order to do it. Why then he would take on a guy who's got a record of failure and put him into this position? I think he has a record of failure. I don't see.
Evidently because Obama trusts him and trusts his advice. I mean, Obama was leaning heavily on his advice. There were a number of policy conflicts. Was the stimulus big enough? And how hard should you have pushed for more stimulus?
Right.
Would have been one of those conflicts.
Okay, but I think each of these decisions have been.
The books that I read.
He's a lawyer, and he doesn't have much training, and it shows pretty clearly that he doesn't know quite what to do on the economic front. And he relied on Larry, and I think he got pretty bad advice. I think Dodd-Frank is a very failed piece of legislation. I don't think it really fixes the banks fundamentally. I think that in many ways the financial system is more dangerous and risky than it was. I think the Obamacare is a catastrophic success. It's going to be doing great things, but at an enormous potential cost. And it's not really what we needed to fix, to give everybody a basic health care plan at an affordable cost. We've had no tax reform. We've had no Social Security reform. The system Social Security is 31% underfinanced. Every year Larry Summers mentioned it's 31% underfinanced. in the trustees report, table 4B6.
I never hear anyone, hold on, Larry. I never hear anyone mention that it's 31% underfinanced.
Well, just look at the trustees report.
Larry Summers or anybody else.
Just look at the trustees report. The trustees, who are the political appointees of the president, don't talk about its table, but it's right there.
Well, hold on.
The actuaries
I'm not
arguing
with you. I'm not arguing, Larry.
Right there in the table
Larry,
4B6.
Larry, I'm not arguing with you about the assessment of the status of the Social Security system. I'm arguing with you about the permissible boundaries of discourse in contemporary politics. That's what I'm arguing.
No, I'm talking about real economic.
I'm
talking about real leadership
because everybody else respects them, and they don't talk about.
And I'm talking about real economic leadership and throwing money at a problem, which is what we had, which is what we saw: huge expenditures for very little impact on the economy. That wasn't a real diagnosis of what was going wrong with the economy. We've now had Bernanke print huge amounts of money to try and keep interest rates low. That hasn't worked. So we have failed policy here. We've got, a history here of failed policy. And you want to say this is a guy, based on that record, he should be the top banker in the country. I don't see it. I don't see that we have anything great.
Tell us, Larry, tell us what the direction is. Okay, we're done with that.
Okay.
You and I disagreed about Summers. Tell us what the different direction would be and needs to be, and tell us how Janet Yellen, as chairman of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve banking system, would take us in that direction. What needs to be happening, and what would Yellen do to affect that?
Well, I don't know what I'm going to let Janet speak for herself about what she would do. We've had private conversations. I would tell you what I think needs to be done to fix the financial system in a fundamental way, and we need to take the equity out, the leverage out of the banking system, and we need to take away the opacity. We need to have disclosure of what the banks are holding at a very micro level on a real-time basis. So the two big problems with our banking system are leverage and opacity. And so what we need to do is move rapidly to what I call a limited purpose banking system, which is mutual fund banking, where all the financial corporations are run as 100% equity financed, that's to say non-leveraged. Little banks, mutual funds like a little bank that takes in the money by selling shares, so it's not leveraged, it's not borrowing any money, and then it invests in the things that it's specializing in. Now that's the way to run financial intermediation without the intermediary, the banks, the mutual funds themselves ever going broke, ever failing. And that's the way to keep the banking system completely secure. You'll never see another bank run again.
Okay.
Now that's...
Hold on a minute. Excuse me. Okay, limited purpose banking is what you would do if you were God. Okay, that's going to require an act of Congress, right? This is a very significant extension and deepening of financial regulation. But we're talking about who's going to be the next chairman of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors and what they can do.
Okay, but listen.
And they can't do that.
But Glenn, I think I want to point out that we're moving in this direction. The SEC just recently required the money market funds to no longer promise that they were going to back those deposits to the buck. Now, in effect, they said money market funds can no longer be leveraged. And that's a big step. So we have a big chunk of the financial system that just turned into a true equity finance mutual fund system. That's quite enormous. If we moved our mortgage system to what they have in Europe, which is the covered bond mortgage system, which is also an equity-based mutual fund system, we would make the mortgage system work, and that would be secure. And we need disclosure too about it, so we don't never have any liar loans again. And that disclosure has to be done by a government agency, not by Joe Blow, who's running some mortgage company, and say.
Can I just observe that you're not addressing my point?
Well,
I take
I'm saying
observations as...
we are moving I think, and have the potential for moving further. I think that the leader of the Fed can help us move the country closer to, we're taking steps already. I think we can get all the way to limited purpose banking with the right leadership at the Fed. I don't see Summers as really providing leadership in any of the jobs he's had in any fundamental way. That's the big problem. He's kind of gone along as opposed to really saying this is what needs to be done and here's why and here's the problem. He hasn't really talked to the public and explained the nature of the problem with the banking system, the nature of the problem with the healthcare system, the nature of the problem with Social Security, the nature of the problem with the tax system. When have you had anybody in this administration really sit down and talk to the public about these problems in a more than a cursory way?
From the president on down, I haven't had anybody talk. The president gave a speech recently in which he suggested that the government wanted to get out of the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Right.
But
and it's time we got out.
But I wanted to ask you something else.
Yeah, go ahead.
You say it's time we got up. Okay, so I want to ask you something else though. So the scuttlebutt is that the insiders, the people who have served in the administration of economic policy making positions, like Timothy Geithner or Peter Orszag or others, tend to incline toward Summers. And it's the outsiders, people outside the administration like Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and many others, who have been, and yourself included, advocating for Janet Yellen. Is that true? And if so, what do you make of it?
I think it is true. I think that Loury was very effective in bringing a lot of people that were very beholden to him into government service, so that you have. I view these people as clones, really, of Summers to a large extent. And many of them ultimately rejected his leadership and got into arguments with him, and did not find the whole experience to be a happy one. So I don't see that hiring a bunch of yes men, surrounding yourself with a bunch of yes men, and then leaving the president with those people is necessarily the way to go. I mean, the guy who was just Gene Sperling, was the head of the National Economic Council. He's not a accomplished economist. The guy who's now become head of that, I forget even his name. It's Jonathan Furman, I think. He's a bright guy, but he's
from Chicago.
He's not he's not from the University of Chicago, from the economics department. He's not a member of that department. He's not an academic.
Yeah, I understand.
So we're talking about fifth raters here, or third raters, not first rate economists in these positions. Alan Kruger obviously is a first rate economist. He's been at the council, and I don't know who's going to replace him. And I think he's a very independent person and full of integrity, so I respect him deeply. But I'm not too impressed with Summers of the people that have that he's brought around him. I think Christy Romer was quite independent and did not get along with Summers, and the guy doesn't respect other people's opinion. That's another big problem. When you have 17 people on the board of governors of the Fed and you can't get anybody to agree with you, that's going to be a problem.
Okay, Larry. So let me try this on you. When I was on the faculty of the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard many years ago, whenever we would be considering an appointment for some big professorship, amongst the qualities of the candidates that would be delineated, weighed, and assessed were something that we called quality of mind. Okay, so there would be, how many publications and what kind of impact and the citation count and the influence and whatnot. But you'd also get around at the end of the day to talking about the quality of mind. So this was this ineffable, very difficult to put your finger on characteristic, okay? That when you come into a room and you engage with somebody, let's say it's a crisis and we're all sitting around the table trying to solve the problem. Work the problem, people. You remember that thing from Apollo 13, when the Ed Harris character is in the Situation Room trying to get his engineers to solve the problem, how to get the guys back? And somebody is talking, and somebody is coming up with ideas. Somebody jumps up and goes to the flipboard or to the whiteboard and starts writing something down. Somebody is engaged, all right? Yeah. And you see the quality of their mind, right? Now, there is such a thing as quality of mind, and people have it differently. And the scuttlebutt is that Larry Summers has got it big time. Now, I know that you're probably going to refute that or disagree with that.
Well, look, Glenn. I knew Larry Summers in grad school.
That might be what's impressing Barack Obama. That's where I was trying to go with that. The reason why the president of the United States might actually do what you can't comprehend is that he's sat in those rooms, he's been in those crises, and he's seen that mind working. And it's not beyond belief that Larry Summers might, under such circumstances, have performed in a way that would have impressed the president of the United States.
Well, I think he's impressed a lot of people. A lot of reporters think he's the most brilliant person in the world when it comes to economics. But I personally don't. I've been around a lot of very smart people in my day. I've written 4 papers with Larry. I know what he contributes and doesn't contribute to research.
4 papers.
And
you know what he contributes and what he doesn't contribute. Wow.
Yes. And
Larry, thanks for being candid.
And yeah, so I haven't. If he had 5 articles that are most cited in the top 200, would be one thing. If he had even 10, if he had 20, it'd be even more impressive. He has 0. So the economics profession doesn't view his academic work as particularly notable. So I don't view his policy work as particularly notable.
Hold on.
The fact that
I think that's unfair,
he
Larry.
can, have a good conversation about a lot of things. Well, so can you, Glenn. And frankly, I learn a lot more listening to you than I'd ever learn, and I ever learn listening to him, because you don't have all the answers. You realize you're smart enough to ask questions and have a real dialogue, and that's the most important thing for an intelligent person, to realize that they don't know everything. Larry hasn't learned that lesson yet, and that shows he's not as smart as he thinks.
I'm going to let that be the last word in our conversation, and thank you very much, Laurence Kotlikoff, for coming on the.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Anytime, Glenn. Take care. Bye-bye.